Imagine building a civilization so advanced, so breathtaking, so utterly impressive, and then just leaving. No forwarding address, no out-of-office message, no farewell post. Just gone. That's the Maya. And honestly, respect. For over 2,000 years, the Maya dominated Mesoamerica with a confidence that makes modern tech bros look humble. They built soaring pyramids that aligned perfectly with celestial events, not with laser levels, not with GPS, but with math, patience, and an almost suspicious amount of astronomical genius. They developed one of the only fully written languages in the ancient Americas. They invented the concept of zero independently, which, if you've ever tried to teach a 6-year-old that zero is a number, you understand is an achievement that deserves its own national holiday. They tracked the movements of Venus with such precision that their calculations differ from modern astronomy by only 14 seconds per year. 14 seconds. Your phone's weather app can't even tell you if it'll rain in an hour. At its height, the Maya civilization stretched across what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, a mosaic of city-states, each with its own rulers, its own art, its own political drama, and naturally, its own enemies. Think of it less like a unified empire and more like a very intense group chat where everyone is simultaneously flexing and fighting. Tikal in the north, Calakmul lurking in the shadows, Palenque glowing like the main character it always knew it was. Copan, Quirigua, Caracol, hundreds of cities, each competing for power, prestige, and the kind of legacy that gets carved in stone, literally. The Classic period, running roughly from 250 CE to 900 CE, was the Mayas' golden age, their renaissance, their roaring 20s, their main character era. Cities ballooned in size. Populations exploded. Trade routes stretched across the region, carrying jade, obsidian, cacao, and the kind of political alliances that would make even a seasoned diplomat nervous. At Tikal alone, the population may have reached somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 people, roughly the population of a modern mid-sized city, built entirely without the wheel, without metal tools, and without a single project management software. If that doesn't make you feel slightly inadequate about your productivity, nothing will. The rulers, the Kuhul Aja, or Holy Lords, governed with a divine authority that wasn't just political, it was cosmic. The king didn't just rule the city. He was the axis of the universe, the living bridge between the human world and the supernatural realm. Every ritual he performed, every war he fought, every monument he commissioned was an act of world maintenance. Fail in your duties, and crops fail, rains don't come, and the universe itself begins to wobble. No pressure. The Kuhul Aja were, essentially, trying to prevent the apocalypse on a daily basis while also managing foreign policy and keeping the nobles from stabbing them in the back, literally, and sometimes figuratively. Among the most celebrated of these rulers was Kinich Janab Pakal of Palenque, known to history simply as Pakal the Great, who ascended to the throne at the age of 12 and ruled for 68 years. Dying in 683 CE at around 80 years old. His tomb, discovered in 1952 beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions by Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruiz Lujilier, contained a sarcophagus lid so breathtaking, so intricately carved, that it sparked one of archaeology's most entertaining and completely unhinged conspiracy theories, that Pakal was an ancient astronaut piloting a spaceship. He was not. He was a king descending into the underworld, which is admittedly less exciting to certain types of people on the internet, but considerably more accurate. The lid is genuinely one of the most beautiful objects ever created by human hands, and it deserves better than being the centerpiece of a History Channel special hosted by someone wearing too many rings. Meanwhile, the rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul reads like the geopolitical thriller nobody thought to write. For centuries, These two superpowers maneuvered against each other like chess grandmasters, building networks of allied city-states, arranging strategic marriages, and occasionally just going to war in the old-fashioned way. In 562 CE, Calakmul, in a move that political scientists today would call absolutely devastating, orchestrated a coalition that brought Tikal to its knees, killing its ruler and sending the city into what archaeologists call a hiatus, a period of silence and decline that lasted over a century. Tikal's response, roughly 130 years later, was to come back swinging so hard that it essentially dominated the classic Maya world for the remainder of the period. The comeback was so thorough, so dramatic, that Tikal erected enormous twin pyramid complexes to commemorate every 20-year calendar cycle, the Maya equivalent of posting a decade in review thread that nobody asked for but everyone respects. And then comes the question that has haunted archaeologists, historians, and amateur documentary watchers alike for generations. What happened? What caused the sudden, dramatic, bewildering collapse of the classic Maya civilization between roughly 800 and 950 CE? Cities that had stood for centuries were abandoned. Monuments stopped being erected, the last long count date on a monument being 909 CE, a silence so loud that archaeologists call it the collapse of the dedicatory record. Populations plummeted. Palaces were left empty. The jungle, patient and relentless, crept back over everything. Here is what we know. It was not aliens. We should probably say that up front and get it out of the way. What researchers have pieced together is a catastrophic convergence of pressures so severe that even the most competent civilization on the planet would have struggled to survive it. First, drought. Paleoclimatologists, scientists who study ancient climates, by looking at things like sediment cores, cave formations called speleothems, and lake levels, have found compelling evidence of prolonged, severe droughts hitting the southern Maya lowlands during the Terminal Classic period. These weren't the kind of droughts where you water the lawn less often. These were multi-year, multi-decade events that decimated agriculture, dried up reservoirs, and cracked the foundation of an economy entirely built on maize corn, the sacred crop, the backbone of Maya civilization, the thing that literally appears in creation myths as the substance from which human beings were made. When the rain stopped, everything stopped. Second, overpopulation and environmental degradation. The classic Maya had been remarkably good at managing their environment, terracing hillsides, building raised fields in swampy areas, maintaining sophisticated water storage systems. But by the late Classic period, population densities in the southern lowlands had reached levels that the land simply could not sustainably support. Forests were cleared for agriculture and construction. Soil erosion accelerated. The same ingenuity that had made Maya cities thrive was now outpacing the capacity of the ecosystem to recover. It's one of history's most uncomfortable ironies. Success itself became a contributing factor to collapse. There is a joke somewhere in there about scaling too fast, but it feels too soon, even 1,400 years later. Third, warfare. The Terminal Classic period saw a dramatic intensification of conflict between Maya city-states, a kind of last resort scrambling for resources that looks, in the archaeological record, like a pressure cooker finally releasing. Elite competition ramped up. Political alliances fractured. Cities that had coexisted for centuries began attacking each other with increasing frequency and ferocity. In some areas, fortifications were hastily constructed earthworks, defensive walls suggesting that communities were no longer just competing, but actively terrified. The social contract that had held Maya civilization together, the one that said the king maintains cosmic order and in return the people give labor, food, and loyalty, began to break down. When the rains don't come, and the king performs every ritual he knows, and still nothing grows, people start asking difficult questions about divine authority. They were asking, essentially, what the internet would today frame as, "Bro, Is this your king? And the answer was increasingly, maybe not. Fourth, political fragmentation. The very structure of Maya civilization, that mosaic of independent city-states, which had been a source of cultural richness and resilience for centuries, became a liability in crisis. There was no central authority to coordinate a response, no Maya equivalent of a federal emergency management agency. Each city faced its pressures alone, and each one fell alone. Some rulers fled to secondary sites. Some cities were simply depopulated gradually, people drifting toward coastal areas or the northern lowlands, where conditions were slightly better. There was no single moment of catastrophe, no asteroid, no invasion, no plague that we can point to, just a slow, grinding, heartbreaking dispersal. The lights going out, one by one, across hundreds of miles of jungle. But here is the part that the word collapse obscures, the part that gets lost when we frame the story as a tragedy. The Maya did not disappear. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand, and also one of the most frequently misunderstood. The classic Maya cities of the southern lowlands were abandoned, yes. The long count calendar fell out of use. The great building programs ceased. But the Maya people, millions of them, continued to live, to farm, to worship, to create art, to speak their languages, to maintain their identities. In the northern Yucatan, cities like Chichen Itza and Uxmal rose to prominence during and after the collapse of the South. The post-classic period saw new forms of Maya civilization, new networks of trade and power, centered on coastal ports and new political configurations. And today, roughly 7 to 10 million people of Maya descent live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They speak dozens of Maya languages: Yucatec, Quiche, Mam, Tzotzil, Tzeltal, and many more, and maintain cultural traditions that connect them directly to the civilization that built Tikal and Palenque. The collapse wasn't the end of the Maya. It was the end of a particular form of Maya political organization. The Maya themselves just adapted, as people do, and kept going. In Reddit terms, the civilization was deleted, but the subreddit stayed active. The rediscovery of the classic Maya by the Western world is its own fascinating and occasionally embarrassing story. John Lloyd Stephens, an American diplomat and writer, and Frederick Catherwood, a British artist, traveled through Central America and Mexico in 1839 and 1840, stumbling through jungle to document ruins that local Maya communities had literally never lost track of. Their published accounts, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, caused a sensation in Europe and North America, introducing the broader world to the existence of a lost civilization. Catherwood's illustrations, produced under genuinely terrible field conditions, with mosquitoes, heat, and the constant threat of political instability, are still breathtakingly beautiful. Stephens had the good grace to acknowledge that the ruins were the product of the ancestors of the indigenous people still living in the region, a statement that was, by the standards of 19th century archaeological thinking, remarkably progressive, and by the standards of basic common sense, simply obvious. The 20th century brought systematic archaeological excavation to Maya sites across the region, and with it, a series of revelations that repeatedly overturned what researchers thought they knew. For much of the early and mid-20th century, scholars operated under what might be called the peaceful Maya hypothesis, the idea that the classic Maya were a uniquely peaceful, contemplative civilization ruled by astronomer priests more interested in the stars than in warfare. This was partly wishful thinking, partly the product of not yet being able to read Maya hieroglyphs, and partly, one suspects, the academic equivalent of projecting. The Maya hieroglyphic script, which had resisted decipherment for decades, began to yield its secrets in the second half of the 20th century, primarily through the work of scholars like Yuri Konorazov, Heinrich Berlin, Tatiana Proskouriakov, and, eventually, the broader epigraphic community that cracked the code wide open. What the texts revealed was not a civilization of peaceful stargazers, but something far more human: dynasties, wars, betrayals, alliances, propaganda, and rulers who were every bit as politically calculating as any modern politician, but with better hats. The development of LiDAR technology, light detection and ranging, has, in the 21st century, transformed Maya archaeology in ways that feel almost unfair. LiDAR uses laser pulses, fired from aircraft, to penetrate the forest canopy and map the ground surface beneath, revealing hidden structures invisible to ground-level survey. When researchers applied LiDAR to the region around Tikal in 2018, they found a previously unknown scale of urban development roads, reservoirs, agricultural terraces, defensive earthworks, and structures covering an area far larger than anyone had suspected. The lowland Maya population during the Classic period may have been as high as 10 to 15 million people. 10 to 15 million people living in a sophisticated urban landscape hidden beneath the jungle for over 1,000 years. If archaeology has a genre, this one is definitely thriller. What the Maya achieved and what was lost when the classic cities fell silent is difficult to fully comprehend even now. The Dresden Codex, one of the only surviving pre-Columbian Maya books, the others having been largely burned by Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa in 1562. In one of history's most culturally catastrophic book burnings, contains astronomical tables of extraordinary precision, including a Venus almanac, accurate enough to be used for practical calculation today. The Madrid Codex contains almanacs for agricultural and ritual purposes. The Paris Codex preserves a Maya zodiac. These are the remnants of a written tradition that must have included thousands of texts, histories, myths, scientific observations, literary works, all reduced to ash by a man who reportedly acknowledged, in his own account, that the burning caused great distress to the Maya people. That's putting it mildly, Diego. The long count calendar, the one that generated so much excitement, anxiety, merchandise, and regrettable tattoos, when it completed a major cycle on December 21, 2012, is itself a monument to Maya intellectual ambition. Rather than a simple cyclical calendar, the long count is a linear count of days stretching back to a mythological creation date in 3114 BCE and forward into spans of time that dwarf recorded human history. It is, in a very real sense, a statement about the relationship between human civilization and deep time, a declaration that the Maya intended to be around long enough to need a calendar that counted millions of years. The 2012 event, for the record, was not predicted by the Maya to be the end of the world. It was the end of a Baktun, a roughly 394-year cycle, and the beginning of a new one, the cosmic equivalent of midnight on New Year's Eve. Meaningful, perhaps spiritually significant, but not, in any Maya text that has ever been found, apocalyptic. The apocalypse was a later addition by people who had not read the source material. What the collapse of the classic Maya teaches us, beyond the specific history, beyond the fascinating archaeology, beyond the genuine awe inspired by a civilization that could calculate the orbit of Venus without a telescope, is something uncomfortable and important about the relationship between complexity and fragility. The very sophistication that made Maya cities magnificent also made them vulnerable. The dense populations required intensive agriculture. The intensive agriculture degraded the environment. The degraded environment couldn't support the dense populations in a drought. The political competition that drove monumental building also prevented coordinated crisis response. The divine authority of rulers, which had organized labor and legitimized governance for centuries, became a liability when the rain stopped and the crops failed, and the people started noticing that the king's cosmic maintenance wasn't working. This is not a story about the inevitable failure of ambitious civilizations. It is a story about specific vulnerabilities, meeting specific conditions, at a specific historical moment. The Maya in the northern Yucatan, facing different environmental conditions and organized differently, did not collapse in the same way. Maya communities adapted, moved, reorganized, and endured. The story is not one of doom but of transformation of a civilization that hit limits, suffered catastrophically, and nonetheless continued. 7 to 10 million people today carry the Maya story forward. They are not relics. They are not remnants. They are the ongoing continuation of one of humanity's great experiments in civilization, one that built pyramids aligned to the stars, developed concepts that took the rest of the world centuries to rediscover, and managed to project enough cultural gravity that we're still, over 1,000 years after the last monument was carved in the southern lowlands, sitting here, making documentaries about them. The jungle grew back over Tikal and Palenque and Copan. The trees rose through the plazas, their roots splitting the stones. The howler monkeys moved into the temples and have been conducting their own vocal ceremonies there ever since, which honestly feels appropriate. But underneath the canopy, the cities waited patient, enduring, impossible to truly silence. They had been built by people who understood that time was deep, that civilization was fragile, and that the only appropriate response to both was to carve your story into stone and hope someone, eventually, would learn to read it. We did. We're still learning. And what we're reading is extraordinary.